In Star's Reach, nothing ever stays the same, and that is true in more ways than one. Part of that comes from the game being in active development, but another more immediate way is through the complex world simulation and the various ways players can manipulate the environment. In our last video, I included this clip of a meteor falling out of the sky and crashing down behind a rocky spire that someone had built a home in the side of. Today I came back and the whole spire was gone. The terrain totally leveled, and a new large structure was being built nearby. It wasn't the meteor that took it down, it was a player, or a group of players. I can't say for sure, but someone must have wanted to clear some space. And what's the best tool for clearing all of that raw material? The Terraformer. It's one of the most critical tools the game gives you right at the beginning, though the free one is pretty weak compared to a high-quality, player-crafted version. It's exactly what you need for digging holes, mining resources, and clearing space. Though there's a lot more going on than just digging through a bunch of voxels. Each material in the world has its own set of molecular properties that govern how it behaves. You can just start digging through things without a care, if you want. But how stable is the ceiling of your tunnel? Tunnels carved through solid rock are pretty stable. In fact, I recently tried to test the extreme limits of such tough materials by hollowing out a large space in a mountain to see when it might collapse. After a couple hours, and even with my friend's help, all we had was a massive cavern, big enough to build a house in. That's not always the case though with other materials. If you try to dig up and out of a cavern like this, you might find yourself hitting softer material like soil, silt, or sand, depending on the environment. And those aren't structurally stable at all. Striking a softer deposit like this will quickly collapse in on your tunnel and potentially bury you alive. Similarly, if you go out into the wild and try to dig straight down, or dig into the side of a hill with lots of dirt piled alongside, the loose soil is going to shift and fill your hole as fast as you're digging, at least until the dirt around the edge settles enough to become stable again. It's a good thing the softer dirt is faster to mine up than the harder stone, since each material has its own adhesion stat that helps determine how tough it is to break apart. Of course, so far all we've done here is go in blind, digging random holes. You might find some things here and there, but if you have something you really want to get, then you're going to need to use the Terraformer's scanning function. To start, we just hit Tab and open the list of resources available on the planet. Each planet can have a differing selection, and I was surprised the other day to discover that one of the planets actually didn't have iron. Sometimes finding the right resources does involve some traveling. That said, once we find what we need on the list, we just select it, then hit E. This sends out a scanning pulse that'll provide you with guidance towards the closest deposit. The results can come back in one of two forms. The long-range form shows a direction gauge that is less accurate, but gives you a general direction to travel. Once you get closer, the scan will start returning results in the short-range form. This shows up as cube-shaped deposits at the exact location of the materials. Then it's just time to dig it up. And if you want to maximize your haul, it would be worth it to invest some experience into unlocking the yield skills in the mineralogy tree. There's also skills that will increase your hopper size. The hopper is the part of the terraformer that fills up with all the useless waste materials, also known as tailings, that you gather during mining. If your hopper gets full, you'll need to find a place to dump the junk back into the world. You could just leave it anywhere outside of your active mining area, or you could take the opportunity to strategically place it. This does provide one of your first opportunities to build something up in the world, rather than destroying and removing things. The holes you make in this world don't just automatically heal up when no one is looking. They might erode a bit and smooth out around the edges, but in this simulation, nature takes its time. And some scars may never heal. So it's good to use these tailings to keep the landscape looking decent. When you first dump them out, they resemble gravel or loose rocks. They also shift a lot like the aforementioned soil and sand, which makes sense because eventually that's exactly what they'll erode into, blending in and becoming one with the current environment. Grass will even start to grow, assuming the environment is suitable for grass. But what if you don't care about the environment all that much? It is the case that some planets may not end up becoming settlements, so they may just be used for exploring and resource gathering. You just have to remember that the Servitors were left here by the Old Ones in order to maintain these gardens. They don't mind us using them, but they still have their limits. A good example of this is what happens when various resources become too scarce or depleted. The Servitors will let it be known that those resources are now off limits, and they'll issue a warning if you go out mining or damaging them. You can ignore these warnings if you want. It's even fun to sometimes. But there will be consequences, so be prepared. The same is also true about plants and animals, but those are actually a lot easier to manage and harder to deplete to extinction. Possible, but less common. We'll go into more details regarding that in a future video. Our next tool is pretty much the opposite of the Terraformer, even though it currently borrows the same model. It's the Depositor. It does exactly what you might expect. It deposits materials back into the world. So for example, if you had a mining tunnel you wanted to seal back up, but tailings were shifting too much to be effective, you might try sealing it off with some of the very rocks that came out of it. After all, you probably don't need to refill the whole thing. You could also use the Depositor to form a makeshift bridge. We want to make sure it's sturdy, so we'll stick with rock. It's ugly, but it gets the job done. And even though players do have access to grapples and a grav mesh that could easily clear a gap like this, it is worth noting that ground vehicles are on the work in progress skill list. So this kind of thing might become a quick and dirty solution for early explorers to new planets. Keeping with the raw aesthetics of these freshly mined materials, you might decide you want to build something directly using the Depositor, instead of the other building mechanics we'll cover later. It'd be perfect for some sort of oversized Neolithic statue, or even your own Stonehenge. Though, as for a more practical use, for a more civilized player, you could use it to relocate soil for a farm or garden. It also has one other feature that some players may find useful. With the right skills unlocked, it can be used to assay various materials out in the world. Assaying will give you a breakdown of all the material stats and add it to your collection for reference. It starts with a list of crafting-related stats, but then delves deeper by including the material's adhesion, its melting point, listed as liquid above, and what other resources it can be converted to by heating, lithifying, or eroding it. Which brings us to our next tool, the Chronophaser. It's an odd one, and a real game changer for how it interacts with the world and material simulations. There's something about it being able to manipulate materials by accelerating or reversing their geological time, and something about entropy as well. This is Old One tech. The reversing of geological time likely refers to the Lithify ability. This mostly takes a loosely packed material like soil, then converts it into a harder one like rock. Which is great if you want to mine through some of that loose material. You can lithify it first, then punch through it without it all shifting down into the hole you're trying to dig. And here, this alluvial soil gets converted into conglomerate. If we did the opposite and sped up time, we'd then have the erode ability. It takes a harder material and breaks it apart into something more like dirt or sand. Here, this chert breaks down into laterite soil, among other things. Finally, we get to what I consider the Chronophaser's most interesting ability, the ability to heat and melt resources down into a molten form. After cooling and solidifying, some of these resources will remain the same, while others will have converted into something entirely new. So this sand I've deposited here can be melted down and turned into glass. A lot of the materials you find in the world will either melt, boil, or burn. So you can melt rocks. You can melt your friends. You can melt rocks onto your friends. These particular rocks we melted were converted from chert to red-hot magma and then cooled back down into quartzite. As for our friend, we converted them from alive to dead. Also probably not our friend anymore. And there are a whole lot more possible conversions and uses for the Chronophaser. So much, in fact, that it has its own flowchart. We're not going to go through every possibility here, but you can see how this simulation has a fair amount of complexity to it. It is worth noting, however, that some of these conversions can also be done through a crafting process at the refinery. You can take sand, refine it into silica ore, and then turn that into glass without having to place it all in the world first. Which method you use really just depends on where you're located and what your immediate needs are. There's also another tool that can manipulate the environment in similar, albeit less dramatic ways. That's the Trailblazer. It has its own flamethrower, which can also be used to heat things, but the heat is less intense than the Chronophaser. Instead, its flame spreads out, making it easier to light enemies on fire and burn through plants and brush. I was recently told to think of it as a machete for traversing the landscape. And speaking of traversal, it also has a freeze beam that not only freezes enemies, but also water. It isn't necessarily the most practical way to cross a lake, as I have trouble not slipping off while trying to freeze a path forward, but it's a lot of fun, in case you want a skating rink. Just don't expect it to stay frozen for too long. The effects here are much less permanent. This tool is also from a different branch of skills entirely, and unlocks from the Ranger tree. That's a set of skills we'll be taking a deeper dive with in a future video, so stay tuned. To wrap this one on the world sim and terraforming, let's take a quick look at what's to come in future development over on the developer roadmap. It is a great resource, by the way, regularly updated, and I linked it in the description. It shows some details regarding the upcoming civil engineering skills, one of which includes the ability to carve much cleaner, neater tunnels, with the slight drawback of not yielding any resources. That shouldn't be too bad though, as long as you scan for anything valuable before committing to the dig. Another aspect mentions using waterworks to manage the hydrology of a world, so that sounds like it'll be a significant increase in our ability to control the flow and retention of water where we want it. That'll be coming after the implementation of a more involved water cycle that includes evaporation and water springs that cycle water in and out in a closed loop. This will also bring with it things like naturally occurring waterfalls and flowing rivers. Outside of civil engineering, we've also heard about increased dangers to mining, such as hazardous gases, some of which are apparently corrosive, which I speculate may damage gear and potentially be lethal. There's also poisonous gas, which I'm sure would be lethal. And of course, there's going to be explosive gases, which just sounds like the most fun to me. All of which I'm sure will be bundled with the new skills for gas harvesting, another work-in-progress skill. So, any questions? And what topic should I take a deep dive into next? I may have already covered some in this playlist here. If not, let me know down in the comments. And be sure to like and subscribe for more. Till next time.